welcome, and hopefully we're having a good start to our day. As you can see here, we do have a little agenda that we will go over, and want us to kind of think about the state of the U.S. economy in the 1920s. And so I'm going to open up here in a moment a little Jamboard or whiteboard that you can write on. Then I do have a little video clip here on stormy weather that's going to really kind of hit the immediate impact of the Great Depression on the United States. So a more human impact of it, and then give some time to work on that assignment that is due today. All right, does anyone have any questions before we start? All right, and so you can see in the chat the link to this jam file, and so please click on it and go to it. All right, everyone should have access to it, and if for some reason you don't get access to it, please just let me know. But what I'm looking for here is one word or phrase that describes the U.S. economy prior to 1929. So we're looking at the 1920s here. Just put down a word or phrase. There we go. We should be all set. Always those one little last little clips and things. So hopefully everyone now can add some stuff to it. So that was a good catch. So just pop in there and just let's put some stuff down. That'd be great. All right. And so if for some reason you weren't able to connect, I did once again put the link into the chat. And so please click on that and join the Jamboard. And one word describing phase, the economy in the 1920s. It's okay if we get duplications. That's fine. In many ways, if we do get duplications, it just validates our thoughts. Okay, so I'm seeing some good stuff there. I'm seeing it grew, it was healthy, it was booming, it was good, it was prosperous, it was super. Growing. All right, we're just writing away here. Okay. All right. One thing I want to throw out there, because it really looks like in the 1920s, uh, the economy is doing really, really, really well. All right. Based on this, looks like it's doing really, really well. Super duper, give kind of like 2 thumbs up. I guess, we look at it and we look at the events and how far reaching was this success? Was it shared by all? And if we scratch the surface of the American economy, what might we see under the surface? Feel free to add a thought, that thought, or your response to that thought on the Jamboard or in the chat. So what I'm asking you is, was everything that we see here, healthy, booming, good, increases, was it real? All right, so what some historians and economists would say that, yeah, the economy is doing well, and that external forces really slowed the process down, referring to events that were happening outside the United States. Will contribute to it. The fragility of European economies, and the political and the social unrest that's going on out there in the world is playing a part into why the U.S. economy is going to struggle here by the end of the 1920s. But hindsight looks on it and would say, through all that prosperity, in that in many cases it was a veneer, and you could find historians or you could find economists that would say, let's peel back this roaring aspect of the 1920s, and we can see that there is some problems. And you could look at the construction, and there was a slowdown in construction, and construction typically employs a lot of people, and there's a lot of goods and services that's involved in construction as well. My dad was in the construction trade. And so when times were good, he would have consistent employment, and when times weren't good, there would be some lean times in the Newcomb house. And so by the 1920s, coming to a conclusion, we could see that construction was slowing down. You have that. You have overproduction going on. People not necessarily paying attention to the market forces. So yeah, it's a roaring 20s. People had some ching in their pockets, but we'll see that not everyone had the same amount of money in their pockets. I mean, that's like society today as well. Some gets paid more than others, and so forth. And so people who are owning companies and they're producing things need to pay attention to the fact that maybe consumerism is slowing down a little bit there. And of course, I had mentioned the international events happening. So by 1929, there is some indication that this growing, increasing, prosperous economy has some cracks in it, and just maybe takes one or two things to happen, and then you got the multiplying effect going on here. and we can see how dependent things are on each other. All right, so again, good stuff put in the Jamboard. I greatly appreciate that, so thank you there. And so what I want to do is I want to move on and take a look. I have a little video clip here called Stormy Weather. In some ways, you know, there is some significance to the title itself, Stormy Weather. And so we'll watch maybe about, I'd say about 9 minutes of this clip here. And what I want you to do is, you know, all those nice things that we put in there about the economy of the 1920s, by 1932, it's really going to have an effect. You know, this depression is going to have an effect on people. And so this is what this video clip kind of is going to get at. All right. So give me a moment here. Let me call up my video clip. All right. I'm a clicking machine. All right, so like anytime we watch video clips, I do encourage you to think about some takeaways, how perhaps maybe there's an image in there that resonated with you, and feel free to, at the end of the clip or while the clip is going on, put your thoughts into the chat.
Millions of Americans could no longer provide for their families. With nowhere to turn for help, they were angry and they were approaching their breaking point. 3 years into the Depression, the American system was in grave danger. Unless it could change and change quickly, it might not survive.
Bad times had arrived without warning. After a decade of expanding prosperity, almost overnight, the Wall Street crash of 1929 shattered America's confidence in its economy.
I was 11 years old, but how well I remember it. It was like the skies had grown dark, thunder. And all of a sudden, faces were tragic, and people were walking around in the hallways of our building and in the streets with inquiring eyes and saying, has it happened to you? Has it happened to us? What is happening?
With the living telegrams at that time. And pretty soon, you could feel a horror behind the door you was knocking. When you knock on the door, when the voice come out, yeah, who is it, who is it? I say, I have a telegram. Well, slide under the door, slide on, or go away. Get away from me, get away from me.
The collapse of the New York Stock Exchange in 1929 was only the most visible sign of a massive economic crisis. A crisis that spread quickly from Wall Street to Main Street. Miriam Johnson was living in California when the Great Depression arrived at her house.
I was 11 when the crash came. My father at that time, along with a few friends, owned a small grocery store. One day he came home and he laid $2 on the table in the kitchen. And he said, no more store. Everything is gone. And that was the end. For us, it was the end.
Every day produced more bankruptcies, more layoffs, more people with less money in their pockets. Even U.S. Steel, a symbol of American industrial might since the turn of the century, was brought to its knees. In 3 years, the entire full-time payroll was laid off. 225,000 workers.
The Depression hit this country all over. It hit the farm areas, it hit the cities. We were just there, out of work and out of food. And everybody was baffled. You know, nobody had ever had that experience before.
I had been saving for maybe 5, 6 years a piggy bank, money in a piggy bank. Nickels, pennies, dimes the most. It turns out that I was the only one in the family that had any money. Because one day I came home and I grabbed hold of my piggy bank just to give it a shake, and there was nothing in it. My mother was looking at me, and she said, "Your father borrowed the money. He has to go out to look for work, and he needed money to go downtown." And he came home, and I didn't say anything, but my face was swollen with tears. My eyes were blinking with tears. And my father took me in his arms and he said, "I'm sorry. I had to have money. But it's a loan. I'll pay it back to you." He never did. He never did.
My family had exhausted all its credits with the local merchants. And on one occasion, my father came home and asked what was for dinner that night, and my mother said, "There's nothing." How could that be? How could there be nothing? It was one of the few times in my life that I was fearful for myself.
Fearful of losing what little they had left, people rushed to the banks to withdraw their savings. But the banks, too, were short of cash. 1 year after the crash, 800 of them had failed. 9 million savings accounts were wiped out.
There was a janitor called George Gallies who had $1,000 in the Bank of the United States. It had taken Gallies 40 years to save $1,000. After spending 2 nights and 2 days in the pouring rain outside this shuttered, locked bank, literally beating on the walls with his hands in frustration, he realized he was never going to see 10 cents of his money. And he went back to the basement where he lived, and he hanged himself in despair. That's what bank failures did. They crushed tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of ordinary people like George Gallies.
With their savings gone and layoffs increasing, people were forced to sell their cars, their furniture, their wedding rings. Before long, half the country's home mortgages were in default. Families across America found themselves facing eviction.
I remember my brother and I and my mother just couldn't stand to see it happen. So we left my father there to face the auctioneers. And we came home that evening and we met my father, who told us, yes, the house was sold. It was gone. And everything that we had had was no longer ours. The land was gone, the house was gone. And we had 30 days in which time to move out. And my mother sat on the side of the bed and cried. It was the first time I'd ever seen her cry. I'll never forget that moment. That's how our family was affected, and we were not unique.
You know what hurt me most about it was the look of pain on my mother's and father's faces. I couldn't bear to look at them, to look at their misery, to look at their disgrace.
They felt they had only themselves to blame. This was a different generation. This was a generation that had grown up with the old faith, the faith of self-reliance, that people had to stand on their own 2 feet. They didn't say the government has failed me. They said, I'm to blame. I failed in this American system of ours. It's my fault.
One year after the crash, 4 million American families were without any means of support. Worse, they didn't know how to ask for help, and their government didn't know how to provide it.
Okay. Feel free, like I said before, put in the chat reactions or thoughts that you had to this video clip here on the immediate impact of the Great Depression. You know, as businesses started closing, as we started moving into the 1930s, you could see that the Great Depression was having a widespread effect throughout the United States. And a point was brought up in the chat about the protests that would be going on. And you would find that throughout the United States, protests, strikes. We actually had a march that concluded on Washington, D.C. It was known as the Bonus March, and that was by World War I vets. And they were just going to demand from the federal government their World War I pension sooner, so they could provide for their family. The government did not pay the bonus early, and instead cracked down on the bonus marchers and cleared them out of the area. In Minnesota, as I put in there, we're going to have a violent truckers strike in 1934. You know, people are going to be frustrated, and they are going to go to protest as a means to express that frustration. The video clip did point out that, you know, this is something that Americans aren't used to, and we used to believe in the principle, you know, up to that point, up to 1929, this idea of rugged individualism through hard work, perseverance, you shall get rewarded, that type. But this really was kicking in. And I think what some of the people were saying is this Great Depression had a psychological effect on people. And in some that they sometimes call it a private kind of shame. Did you pick up on from the historian, his comment was, who was to blame for people's financial dilemma? Did you pick up on what the historian said? Someone either unmute or put into the chat. What did the historian say? Yeah, you know, people blamed themselves because, you know, some would think that, you know, I should have prepared a little bit better for it. Instead of maybe getting that new toaster or new set of clothes or splurge and buy something, should have just put it in the bank. And so that definitely has an effect when people are thinking, okay, who do I point the finger to? Well, some themselves. Now, another good point was brought up about the banks. All right, and I'm glad someone brought that up about the banks. In this little clip, it showed the banks closing. And when the banks closed, you lost it. You lost it. And for some people, you know, that $1,000 may took them many years to save that money, and then it's gone. How do we know that our money is safe in the banks today? Anyone want to unmute or put into the chat? How do we know that our money in the banks are safe today?
Isn't it the FDIC?
Well said. FDIC, absolutely. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is something that's coming out of the Great Depression. The thought was you should have, it was a way to help rebuild faith in our financial institutions, was to create a safety net. To no fault of your own, the bank collapses, and it's putting a little bit more ownership on the operators of the bank, but also on the Federal Reserve. We did have the Federal Reserve System back then, and the Federal Reserve is supposed to, in some ways, kind of shore up our banks and our lending practices when times like this happen. And it fell short there. And so part of the New Deal program under FDR, who will be one of two presidents in the Great Depression era. You got Herbert Hoover and you got FDR. That was part of his New Deal program. And so I believe it covers up to maybe about $200,000, $250,000 in there. So if you have a little bit more money than that in the bank, well, I suppose you will lose it. Now, when the Great Recession happened, all right, 2007 to 2009, there are a number of banks throughout the United States that closed their doors. But because of FDIC, people got their money. All right. Now, the key with getting your money, though, is you got to make sure that you have to prove that you have that money. So that's why those bank statements, things that you can show that, yep, I have that money in there. And of course, bank records will also indicate that too. So I have not experienced that. Did not experience that in the Great Recession. So I really don't know the full process to it. I will say my grandfather or my grandparents, the Haiders, so on my mom's side of the family, I don't think they fully trusted banks after this. When my grandmother was moved out of her home and into a care facility, my mom and aunt had started going through some drawers, and was finding some money. And my grandmother had pretty close to $2,000 hidden in that house. All right. So that's an example of what bank closures do. People lose trust, and especially of that vintage, that era, and put it in other places. So, all right, some good points brought up. And again, I really encourage you to continue to add more things, ideas into the chat or on mute as we go along here. I do want to also hit the point here that you can see with that frustration, people are struggling to try to figure out solutions. And so one thing I had said at the beginning of this unit was, this is really going to challenge the American people about roles and responsibilities of individuals and also of the different levels of government here. And so they're starting to look at the government as perhaps an entity or a vehicle to help get us through this difficult time. And now it comes down to who is leading the country and whether or not what the people are saying reflects the same ideas of the leaders of our country. And again, I mentioned our two presidents, Herbert Hoover and FDR, and they are different in many, many ways. They come from different political parties with different philosophies, and we will address that tomorrow and the following days with that. Okay, so with that, you should be working on finishing the causes of the Great Depression today. It is due today, so you want to make sure that you get that in. I will keep this Google Meet open so people can stay on, work on their causes. And if you want, I suppose if you want to work with someone, you can, and I can push you into a breakout room where you can work with someone on it. Or you can exit and finish it as well. I want to make sure that I tell you, you have a great day. Enjoy this Wednesday, and I will see you tomorrow.